Pawn chains are basically groups of pawns in a line. Pawn chains can be short or long, mobile or static, weak or strong. At any rate, they must be considered throughout the game, as an effective pawn chain can win the game for you. Just to show you how pawn chains might change the course of a game, let's take a look at a couple of games. And the first of these is a very interesting one. It comes from Denmark in 1991, and it's between Grandmaster Paul van der Sterren and Klaus Berg. It's interesting because Klaus Berg employs an opening variation on which black is relying on a strong pawn chain. Without a strong pawn chain, this opening variation doesn't work. Now let's just see how it works out. It's a King's Indian defence with white playing the same-ish variation. The King's Indian is a hypermodern system where black allows white to take the centre, and with f3, white anchors his centre. Usually, in this particular setup, white angles for some sort of kingside initiative, whereas black tries to mount pressure against the d4 pawn. That's the weak spot in white's central formation, so we're looking for black to hit at that pawn sooner rather than later. So black castles, white plays bishop e3. That makes room for queen d2 and a subsequent bishop h6, maybe. And black now hits at the centre with e5. White pushes by, gaining space, and now Berg employs a very interesting old idea of David Bronstein. Bronstein was one of the most creative grandmasters who ever lived, and he devised this remarkable queen sacrifice coming up after queen d2, queen h4 check, g3, black takes that pawn, and now after queen f2, black is obliged to sacrifice his queen. But Bronstein's idea was that after knight takes f1, queen takes h4, knight takes e3, black is actually getting quite good compensation for the queen. So let's just detail what he's going to get. Already he's got two bishops and a pawn for the queen. He's threatening knight g2 check, winning the queen. He's also threatening knight takes c4. So I think he's going to get another pawn as well. So he will have two bishops, two pawns, and as we can see, a completely connected pawn chain. He hopes that this pawn chain will keep white at bay until he can develop the rest of his pieces. And after that, well, we'll see what transpires. For the time being, white has got to take a little bit of time out defending against black's threats. So king e2 hits the knight, forcing knight takes c4, and now van der Sterren plays rook c1. A good move, noting that knight takes b2 in this position will lead to the loss of the knight. So that is why, after rook c1, Berg plays knight to a6, protecting c7. And after that, van der Sterren plays knight h3. Black plays bishop to d7, white goes b3, black plays knight b6. So all this has been seen many times before in this opening variation. And before this game was played, it was thought to be very unclear. The two bishops and black's long connected pawn chain was thought to make it very difficult for white to make progress. Well, with his next move, van der Sterren shows that he's going to try and get a direct attack going against the black king. Now you'd think that black's king position was pretty secure here. Three pawns, a fianchetto bishop. But the threat of knight g5 is actually very real. Knight g5 will force a move like h6. And after that, the pawn chain around the black king starts to become weaker. So Berg decides to keep the knight out by playing f6. But the instant he moves that pawn, his pawn structure becomes weaker. And van der Sterren moves in on this with f4. Now, just dropping back, it's possible that knight c5 here is an improvement. Just allowing knight g5. Black has to stomach this move. Hopefully he can keep his king position together. I think better for white after knight c5 is just to redirect the knight round to d3 to get rid of black's imposing knight. And after knight takes d3, king takes d3, f5, we reach a characteristic position for this variation, where it's actually quite difficult to call what's going on. The black king appears to be safe. He's starting to create some pressure on the f-file and maybe even on the queen side with a4. All the same, A queen is a queen. Having seen what happens in the game, you would think that black should do this, because f6, going back to the game itself, leads to f4, and with this move, white is leaving open the position. He takes f4. Well, it looks as though black is actually going to win some material here. After knight takes f4, surely he could play g5. But that's exactly what white is waiting for. A loosening of the pawn chain. He drops back to g3. Black can't take the knight. Obviously, it's mate on g7. So he's down to rook a e8. And now white, again, constructs a pawn attack on black's pawn chain by going knight h5 and then h4. I assure you, this is not what black wants when he plays this line. He would like to keep his king position a lot more secure than this. With the position opening up, you have to say that the black knights are looking rather remote. So going back to f4, could Berg have kept the position closed with rook a e8? Well, then I think f5 is very effective and difficult to meet. If black plays g5, there'll be h4 coming up after suitable preparation. And if black takes, then I think white's got a winning combination here. He can go in with the sacrifice, rook takes g7 check, rook g1 check, in comes the queen. There's only one move to defend against the mate here which makes any sense. We can take on f5, and black can't recapture this pawn because of queen h5. Too many threats for black to negotiate. So going back to the game itself, you can see after f4, black's got some practical problems to solve. Berg decides to hack off that pawn and then play rook a e8. But now knight takes g6. Very strong indeed. White is willing to give up material to smash up the black pawn cover around the king and to mass all his pieces on the king side. And white has every chance of success here because, as I say, these knights on the queen side are just onlookers. Berg tries to bring his knight into the game. White moves the king off the d-file, hoping to get some action together with moves like rook h6 coming up. Black tries to break things open. Rook h6 threatens mate in 1. That's why Berg moves his king. Rook h7, knight takes e4, and it turns out black's counterplay is a little bit too slow here. Queen d8 check, decoying the rook back out of the centre, and now this lovely move, queen g5. Black is powerless. His pawns have been wiped out. There's no cover for his king, and if he goes rook e7 to defend the bishop, we have rook h8 check, bishop takes h8, queen g8 checkmate. So the game finished. Knight takes d5, rook takes g7. Of course, this is hopeless. White moved in for the kill with queen g6. So that was a really excellent game. You know, black started out with what looked like an impenetrable pawn chain. That's the point of this whole variation. But Van der Sterren showed there was a way through, and when he got through, he wiped the black king out entirely.